Es ist an der Zeit, ein neues Kapitel aufzuschlagen. Heute, in dieser Stunde, in diesem Moment bin ich von einem einzigen, alles überragenden Gefühl erfüllt, von dem Gefühl der Dankbarkeit. Es war mir eine große Freude. Es war mir eine Ehre. Herzlichen Dank.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Medal School. And tonight is a really exciting night. There's been 16 years of a single person as Chancellor in Germany, and that's Angela Merkel. So tonight we're going to look at the leadership qualities and her top 5 qualities of what allowed her this great success. And essentially, we see the 5 qualities as the following. 1, holding no personal ego. Secondly, not holding grudges. Thirdly, the concept of internationalism. Fourthly, visit your enemy many times, and this is a cracking one looking at her and Putin. And finally, we're going to look at big heart, big problems, immigration. Now, if you haven't already subscribed to Leadership School, if you want to see analysis on some of the biggest leaders in the world, if you want to see certain techniques on business, arts, politics and sports, subscribe now and click the bell button. But now, back to Angela Merkel. Angela Merkel, on any single leadership KPI, has absolutely dominated German politics and international world. She was the youngest Chancellor, aged 51, the first female Chancellor, but she also was the longest serving Chancellor at 16 years, only stepping down this month. And essentially there's been certain leadership qualities that have allowed her this unbelievable success. Now, just to measure some of those KPIs of Angela Merkel, and it's not just your orator's opinion tonight, the United Nations have put Germany as the 6th best country in the world when you look at GDP, education levels, quality of lifestyle, freedom of rights. You then look at other KPIs such as how did Merkel compare to other Western leaders? Well, to give you an idea, she served across 4 US presidents. That was Bush Jr., Obama, Trump and Biden. She served across 5 UK prime ministers, Blair, Brown, Cameron, May and Boris Johnson. And she served across 4 French presidents, Chirac, Sarkozy, Hollande and Macron. So you can see the staying power of Angela Merkel at the very top table of world politics. So the first quality we're going to look at is this idea of no personal ego, which is actually quite a surprising one with leadership. Quite often a leader can quite successfully build support and a following around his own personality. It quite often follows leaders that are extremely good at rhetoric. But with Angela Merkel, her background is science. She was a physicist, and essentially her background was about facts and opinions, and the detail will ultimately outlast rhetoric. One of the things I think that then sums it up is when you hear the feedback from G8 leaders is that essentially they trusted Merkel. And that is from the words of Obama, Putin and Blair. And that's quite an unbelievable skill when you think those 3 different countries had very 3 different outcomes, and you can imagine many leaders losing their trust. The other thing apparently that stood her out at G8 meetings, she was very rarely about herself or her own achievements, but she was very much focused on actually listening to others, taking her turn, and quite often being the last to speak in the room while she thought about thoughts. Now, this having sort of no own ego is an unbelievable leadership strength, and actually shows the comfortableness someone has within their own skill. But also the feedback was she didn't let down, she wasn't walked over, she just didn't put her ego on the line, and she put policy and solution first. So that's an unbelievable leadership quality that's quite rare, but probably led to longevity. And also in Germany, you obviously have a makeup of multiple parties when it comes to leadership, rather than, say, a 2-party system. And again, probably that no ego and willing to work with others is an unbelievable trait to go forward. The next bit we're going to look at Angela Merkel is her second leadership quality. This idea of not holding a grudge. And she had many difficult situations during her time. But quite often when we talk about grudges, we talk about personal influence that sometimes can actually trigger someone else down a difficult path and cloud over the bigger relationship that's required. So one quite funny moment, but sent shivers across the world, was at one of her early G8 meetings, was when George Bush Jr. went in kind of for a weird, awkward cuddle. And you can see this reaction was bizarre. But actually going forward, Merkel didn't let it in the way of a very good and positive relationship with the United States and carrying on. This relationship with the United States was tested even further later on when in 2013 it came out that the US Secret Services had been bugging Angela Merkel's private mobile since 2002 for over a decade.
On hearing that her mobile phone may have been tapped by US intelligence services, German Chancellor Angela Merkel called President Obama to demand an explanation. It came after confirmation from German security services that allegations in Der Spiegel magazine of NSA spying were plausible.
There was a huge world outcry. Other world leaders had happened. They wanted severe actions against the US. And although Merkel called the US president within a year of that incident, Merkel's working closely with Obama to challenge Russia on Ukraine. And you can see then also when you look at personal grudges, and we're going to get onto this later, personal enemy, is Merkel grew up and spent her time in East Germany. And Putin was a spy and an agent in East Germany, but she never let this get in the way. So I think the second leadership quality that we can take into our own lives is don't hold personal grudges. There's bigger relationships at play. The third leadership quality that I think Angela Merkel probably has in more abundance than kind of arguably any other world leader, and it's probably one of the key factors about why Germany, since the turn of the millennium and since her chancellorship, has come such a manufacturing and trading powerhouse and growth from Europe to Asia.
Angela Merkel has arrived in China for a two-day visit to discuss political and economic issues with Chinese leaders. There we can see the German Chancellor. She's in Tiananmen Square here in Beijing. She's meeting with the Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, who is holding a welcoming ceremony for her at the Great Hall of the People.
Now, Merkel visited China more than any previous chancellor. She did 12 official state visits there. She did over 500 official state visits to different countries around the world once she became chancellor. And she very much saw her role as building business for Germany. Now, one of the amazing stats that then backs up about how this paid dividend was in 2005, when she took leadership, BMW had sold approximately 17,000 cars in China that year. By the time she left office with BMW setting up manufacturing plants in China, BMW sold over 611,000 vehicles in China. I mean, that is bonkers. Now, to give you some comparison to UK car manufacturer, in a similar period of time, Jaguar still only got up to 2,300 cars versus 611,000 from BMW. So all those international trade visits, it did bring a lot of criticism, some of this internationalization. And one of the criticisms it brought was that Merkel was willing to do trade and negotiations with the likes of China and Russia, and those countries never really improved their human rights. those countries actually during the time got more oppressive to the likes of Hong Kong and Ukraine, and also in the Arab Spring.
Since 2010, the end of 2010 and early 2011, people who are living under authoritarian rule with lots of repression, including military and police repression, have lost their fear of protests.
There was no sort of action from Merkel other than words of support to support these factions of people wanting democracy like Germany in terms of military support. And actually during her time, with the exception of Afghanistan, which she inherited, where there were German forces supporting the peacekeeping.
Unannounced and arriving by helicopter, Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel visited northern Afghanistan to meet with German peacekeeping troops.
Germany actually always was very visible in the fact that they weren't at conflicts or going forward. Some people say it's their history, but one of the things that Merkel does have a challenge on is that she loved doing internationalism for trade, but she also wouldn't necessarily hold these countries to account on HR or green issues. But what is interesting, in many ways she put Germany first by essentially growing these relationships, so it meant that Germany was a trading powerhouse. The next one we go on to, and this is one of the most fascinating leadership traits I think you can see from a leader that's very different to other people, and that's visit your enemy multiple times. I've actually always believed this in business, and the reason I've believed it in business is that your enemy and your counterpart probably actually knows what you're going through more than anyone else. And actually knowing your enemy and competition in close detail only helps you improve your offering, your differentiation, your unique selling point. But I think this is best summed up with Merkel's relationship with Putin. Now, these two are the two leaders that did actually cover each other's time. Putin's actually the only leader to outlast Merkel, but you'd question about, is it a transparent democracy in the exact same way that Merkel had to deal with? What's fascinating is Merkel was fluent in Russian and studied it. Putin was fluent in German, having been an agent in East Germany. And Merkel obviously grew up in East Germany. So in many ways, they're kind of two sides of the coin. What you first of all see is huge issues during their time in terms of where they see international war and fairness. So a good example was when a plane was shot down over the Ukraine.
Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 crashed in eastern Ukraine on Thursday the 17th of July, killing all 298 people on board. The Boeing 777 aircraft came down in an area northeast of the town of Shakhtarsk in rebel-held territory close to the Russian border.
And Russia basically, in many opinions, illegally went into the Crimea. Germany and America teamed up to condemn Putin. But what's fascinating about Merkel is she spent 17-hour negotiation with Putin, the president of the Ukraine, Hollande, and in those 17 hours they came to a solution where at least war was stopped, even if the presence of Russia wasn't. But that is an unbelievable personal involvement. Now, apparently since 2012, it's reported that Merkel personally visited Putin 34 times. The other thing that's incredible is considering these visits was also, even in her last year of leadership and despite all the ups and downs of Russia over the last 16 years, Merkel signed Germany up to Nord Stream 2.
Now I've come to the point of economic cooperation. There's been a lot of discussion surrounding Nord Stream 2, and I understand Petro Poroshenko, who is sitting here and saying we're a transit territory for Russian gas and we'd like to remain that. And I've assured him over and over again that we will give him all our support and negotiate things so it remains that way. Secondly, a molecule of Russian gas remains a molecule of Russian gas, regardless of whether it comes through Ukraine or by way of the Baltic Sea. That is the question of how dependent we are on Russian gas. It cannot be resolved by deciding which pipeline it's coming from. No one wants to be unilaterally dependent on Russia, but if we received Russian gas during the Cold War, not only in the DDR, where I lived, but also in West Germany, then I don't see why the times and situation today should be so much worse.
Which essentially gives Russia the ability to sell gas and a gas pipeline into Russia across the Baltic, and very similar to Schroeder. Very similar to Merkel's predecessor, Schroeder, who did Nord Stream 1. And Nord Stream 2 will allow Russia, the main beneficiary, to pipeline gas into Germany. On the flip side, Merkel benefits because essentially what it does do is it allows the Germans to have gas to supply their heavy industry, across from car manufacturing to other sources, and they require a shed load of gas. And it's an incredible solution she's done there. So we learned from Merkel that actually visiting your enemy often and being close to your enemy, although you might not always be in agreement, and she condemned the Crimea while also getting a truce fire over Ukraine, is that essentially you get a relationship, and it kind of ended in the weirdest way. And you see now Putin handing flowers to Merkel on the last visit, and Russia doing something they've never done for an international foreign leader before, and that's actually filling one of the main orchestra halls in the Kremlin and actually doing a service for Angela Merkel to thank her for her time and being a great both friend and foe. So meeting your enemy many times is a great leadership trait. Now, going into the fifth and final leadership trait, Angela Merkel's big heart, big problems, immigration. In August 2015, when refugees were streaming across Europe following the Syrian crisis, Merkel very, very famously said, and I'll say this in my best German, "Wir schaffen das," we'll manage this. And overnight, Germany took 18,000 refugees. And as you can see from this footage, there's the refugees singing "Germany, Germany." Now, this move got both great praise and great criticism. The reason it gave great criticism is suddenly refugees were flooding across Europe. And also it seemed that rather than going to the first place of safety, they were going to Germany for their best opportunity of hope. Now, as a grandson of refugees, I take the side that it's great that, you support refugees in times of need. But one of the big debates was it actually helpful what Merkel did? Because actually it kind of broke EU unity. It didn't maybe help the neighbouring countries that were already having millions of refugees. But one of the things you can say is Germany has the fifth highest refugee population in the world at over 1.7 million people. And the other thing is, and I'll put a link to it below, is Philip Alterman has put that 5 years on it's worked, and he gives a lot of example of how those refugees to Germany have now gone on to get degrees and be a valuable part of the community. I'm later with Medal School, I think in 2022, going to have a much bigger refugee debate where we get some of the best experts, because I think refugee policy and leadership is a massive field of topic. But what was clear from Angela Merkel, she really cared. And this was maybe a decision that wasn't the scientist, wasn't the pragmatist. It was someone that acted with a big heart. One of her leadership qualities was big heart, but critics of Merkel say that actually this big heart and this open border proposal has actually led to the rise of extremism in Europe. Some people debated, was it the cause of Brexit? I probably dispute that, but the critics raised that. And the other thing is was it actually the best for the refugees in the long term, and does it solve refugee issues? She also later on did a deal with Turkey about funding them to essentially secure them within Turkey and kind of closing down the future opportunity. And that summer of 2015 was a unique opportunity for refugees, and more like less than 3,000 refugees are taken by Germany today. So it's a huge discussion point, but it's one of her leadership qualities. So just to recap Angela Merkel's big five leadership qualities. Her leadership qualities was don't have your own ego as part of your leadership skill set. And that went down very well with trustworthiness in the G8. The secondly is this idea of not holding grudges, even when she was phone tapped by the Americans. The third idea is internationalism. You've seen the sales of the likes of German car producers like BMW Rocket in China. The fourth one was this idea of visiting your enemy many times in the case of Vladimir Putin. And the fifth one was this big heart on refugees. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe. In 2022, we've got much more coming up. And essentially from Medal School, we've really enjoyed having you tonight. And that's why Angela Merkel was leader for 16 years.